Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Lily. Yes, as Lily was saying, my name's Simon Claiborne. I work for BBOUT as well. I'm funded entirely by West Berkshire Council and some of their development funds. I work in the West Berkshire Wild Verges project as the project officer. So basically what we're doing is we're surveying our rural verge network in that district, and I'm trying to come up with a better management plan for them. And through a conversation that Lily and I had some time ago, a little idea came to me of creating a bit of a tool to sort of better equip community groups and small landowners and anybody that's interested in managing a bit of verge or a bit of green space better for wildlife. And it was trying to come up with a way of disseminating a large amount of information for particular sites without necessarily having to have thousands of people in contact at the same time. So this is a sort of a tool to better equip you to do some things, not quite by yourself, but yeah, you're better equipped. Cool. So, so the things that I'm going to be going through, number one is what it does do, what it does not do. Then we're going to run through a bit of an example, and then how to access the files themselves. So the tool is within an Excel spreadsheet. We'll have a little look at it in a bit, and I'll run through an example about how one would enter data into it. But I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but I do have a request for feedback, as this is very much a draft tool. So if anybody'd like to have a go with it and let me know what they think, I'd be very appreciative. So what it does do, it gives a very rough scale of advice based on generalized features of grassland habitats of different qualities. So what that means is we're looking at the sort of, instead of being really sort of picky about doing very detailed surveys, it's sort of a very broad brush look at some key indicators that might tell us how good or how bad a grassland is. Of course, that's totally open to interpretation, but what we're talking about there is a good grassland is one that's generally has fairly short grass, or at least grass that's under control, and plants that are, nice flowers that are able to compete, not just absolutely chock-a-block with ragwort and thistles. That's a value, but the really kind of distinctive habitats, things like chalk grassland, floodplain meadows, are the kind of things that the tool aims to move you towards. They're sort of nicer habitats away from the rougher pastures and rural strewn fields. So it's definitely been designed with small scale sites in mind, where the rough advice is really enough to do something to aid biodiversity. But I suppose there isn't really a reason why you couldn't upscale it a little bit, or certainly we'll come on to talking about how one assesses one site and breaks it up into little bits to manage bits differently. But certainly you could split larger sites up into smaller parts and manage those separately. It's also a very basic database for storing and tracking information about the site that you manage. So it is very, very simple information, but you can put in multiple years worth of data if you wanted to. So you could do a survey 1 year or just do an assessment 1 year. It will chuck out a bit of management advice, and you could do another assessment the next year. And if anything's changed with the new information, it will give you different management advice, kind of update your management plan as you go. Also allows for different kinds of land parcels, from very, very big ones to that are completely joined together, contiguous, to small ones that are disjointed, and they might be quite spread out, or just sort of like little packy bits. That all works too. So now onto what it does not do. So it does not replace professional ecological advice surveys or assessments. These still absolutely have their place. And if you really want to know the nitty gritty of any kind of a site, any bit of verge or grassland or anything like that, there are surveys out there to assess them yourselves, or I'm sure there are plenty of ecologists or people within BBOUT that can help you with having a look at your site. It doesn't provide all the answers either. That kind of leads us onto this one, which is it doesn't cover all bases. So when we're talking about distinctive habitats, things like your chalk grasslands, there are very particular species of plant that grow there that you don't really get anywhere else. And it means that there are other features besides, invertebrates and birds and small mammals that are completely dependent on those specialized plants in those distinctive habitats. So it doesn't really allow for that slightly more, slightly harder to define sort of habitat, but certainly the broad advice that it does give would fit within the sort of good management advice that you might give someone for a chore grassland. It doesn't maximize biodiversity, so it's very much just simple advice to move you towards gaining biodiversity, to having more flowers, more invertebrates, just nicer stuff in general. And it also does not work as a basis for biodiversity net gain. So I don't know if anybody knows about BNG, but it's the new big thing in development. And basically that's where a developer will pay a landowner to manage their land better for nature and pay them to do it, which is a really, really cool idea. But this is a little bit rough for doing that kind of thing. They've got their own survey to do that kind of thing. So example-wise, I'm not going to come up with cool. So this is our example. It's Tinseltown Country Park. If anyone actually knows this reserve, I would be very impressed. So that this is what one of our reserves that I've just kind of cut up a little bit. So you can see it's really quite large. It's 56,000 square meters, which is a pretty big chunk of land. So this is our site. So this is the overall site, and within that we have individual parcels, and parcels of lands are, they can either be, you know, where you've got a fence between two fields and those two fields are separate and you treat them separately and talk about them separately. They're different parcels of lands. There's a woodland down in the south there, that's a different parcel of land. And it could be that there's not a sort of hard boundary there, but you know, you just arbitrarily said that's a different parcel, that's fine too. But that's just a thing to take note of when we come onto the spreadsheet in a minute. So this is how I split it up into different land parcels. So we've got our northern field up to the top right, and then the southern field is sort of spread out along the middle there, woodland down to the south. And then in towards the top left, we've got our wildflower strip. And we've got all the different area measurements there, which are important because the different area measurements will be factored into the management advice, because smaller sites, you can do less with them than you can do with big sites. All of this was done using a free resource called Magic Maps, something that DEFRA run on their website, which I'm happy to send a link out to at some point. But it's got an area calculator. You can draw these blobby polygons on your maps and export them, save them as PDFs and things like that. So it's a really useful thing to have a go with. But honestly, even if it's just a rough sketch with a rough estimate of the kind of size of areas that you're working with, it's just a really useful thing to reference. But I've used this because I like fancy online maps. It's a big part of my job. Yeah, so that's the sort of basis for where we're sort of starting with the management plans, is that we've got an idea of the different parcels that we want to work on and maybe treat them differently, but certainly we can split them out however we want to. So next I am going to share the spreadsheet. So I filled in one row here so far. So this is what it looks like. So we fill in all of these nicely colored rows here, colored columns rather, and the gray one at the end that says in very large text, do not edit this field. You don't need to type in anything there, that will automatically fill. So the first thing we type in is our site name. So we'll go for Tinseltown Country Park. That's really nicely. And for this one, we're going to go for wildflower strip. Date of assessment, we'll just go for today. And then this is the interesting bit. So this is when it will start automatically filling in land advice. So all of these fields here, a field is just one of these little square bits where you can put in information. They've all got little drop-down lists. So the little arrow at the bottom right of that square there, we can choose verge or Greenspace. And the wildflower strip, because it's sort of long and linear, it's more of a verge than a Greenspace, but you can still put Greenspace if you want. We'll go for verge, and it was a contiguous part. So our choices here are contiguous, disjointed, or sporadic. Disjointed is less than 2 meter gaps, and sporadic is more than 2 meter gaps. If they're contiguous. And what it looks like is it's short and flower rich. So this question here about the vegetation type, soil fertility, that's really key about the starting point. One of the big things about wildflower management and management of grassland in general for wildlife and for wildflowers is that fertility is your enemy. Lower fertility means greater biodiversity, more interesting flowers growing, basically. So this is our little wildflower strip, and we're going to say that it's short and flower rich. The width of the verge, this is just an estimate, so it's less than or equal to 1 meter, 1 to 3 meters, 3 to 5 meters, or more than 5 meters wide. So go for 3 to 5 meters, and you can see something's just popped up over in our right-hand column there. And we'll pick some adjacent land uses as well. So we'll go for intensive farmland, because there's a field just over the way. And a kennet is not far away either. So we're going to go for aquatic. So that counts for semi-aquatic as well, where basically there might be a bit of water come on the grassland. So I'll pick all of those, and then we can go over here. And you can see it's filled up this really quite nicely with lots of information about what we can do. And that's it really. What you can do is, for each of your individual parcels, the site name will stay the same for your site, as long as it's the same site. So we could do Tinseltown again, and then we could do our southern field, 5, 4, 23 again. And we could see that it was one big chunk of land. So we'll go for Greenspace. And it was also very much contiguous. However, I know for a fact that it is quite rich there, and we do get quite a few nasties growing. So it's definitely, it's a longer vegetation, and there's more grass than there are flowers. So we'll go for long and grass rich. The size, so you see when we're talking about green spaces, instead of it being a width of a verge, it's an area measurement. And it was over 1,000 meters squared. 1,000 meters squared is 0.1 of a hectare, so 1/10 of a hectare. It has intensive farmland next to that, and you can see it's filled up with different information, cut and collect 2 times per year, March to April, July, September, October, leaving more than 10 meter square islands and strips as refuges. As I shouldn't have used that term spatiotemporal in there, that's a little bit too fancy, but basically it will kick out information, a very rough management plan for that parcel of land based on the information that you put in. So yeah, that's that really. And it's all available online. I will be sending out a link in a bit. And I'm sure Lily will share it afterwards as well. But if I go back to the presentation, it's got on. Okay. So yeah, so that's our map again. So it doesn't have both of those pieces of information of, you know, the map and the sort of management plan in the same place. That is something that you can do, but that's quite fancy. And I don't quite have the brain power for coding that kind of thing. But certainly having a map of your site and a bit of a management plan of the different sort of areas with different vegetation is a really good starting point for improving things for nature. So, oh, got my little arrows pointing up too early there. So how to access the files. So there's a Google Drive link that I'll send around. Within that, we've got an instruction booklet. It's also got a glossary of terms in. So if any of the terms, any of the ecological stuff I'm talking about sounds a bit wacky, it's probably in that glossary. And if it's not, let me know and I can always add it. The tool is there as well. It's an Excel spreadsheet, which you could download. I'm pretty sure it should work in Google Sheets as well if you don't use Microsoft Office. There's also a feedback form, which I really appreciate anyone that wants to have a go with it, having a go and filling in the feedback form and sending it back to me. And yeah, please make sure to download the files before editing them, because if you edit them online, it'll edit it for everyone. So the way we do that is when you open the link, you'll have the files, which you can see there in the background. And if you were to right-click on the folder name at the top of your screen, which would be called Greenspace and Verge ... It'll open this little menu, and then there's a download option just there towards the bottom. can see with the arrows finally serving their purpose. But yeah, just downloading them first before you fiddle with them is the way to go. And yeah, in the instructions that I've written, I do go into a little bit more detail about what everything is and what you should be putting in each field, but also, I should have gone over that. Sorry, I'm going to have to go back for a second. If we go into here, something that I made sure to do was when you hover over any of the column headers, it gives you a little description of what you want in there. So the rough grade of the vegetation of the land parcel, the width of the verges in meters, or the area of the green space in squared meters, the adjacent land, they're all optional. You don't need to put something in for the adjacent land, but they're just options there if you've got other pressures on the outside that could be an issue. So yeah, that's just there for a little bit of clarity. Right. So yeah, and then request feedback. I'll share my email address. It's also in the instructions and the feedback form. But it's just simon.claiborne@bbout.org.uk, and I'd really appreciate any feedback at any point. My current contract with West Berkshire Council comes to an end in December, and in the winter I'm going to be very, very busy. So if you want to have a go having a bash around the next 5 months or so, that would be absolutely ideal for me. Grand. Well, thank you very much for listening, and are there any questions?